So consider what science has to say about the quality of your attention and how it relates to addiction. This is an amazing book, by the way. Excuse me. This book was published in 2017. It explains that dopamine, the reward-generating neurotransmitter, activates the exact same pleasure centers of the brain, regardless if it's alcohol, cocaine, heroin, food, social media, video games, or internet pornography. Okay? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that all these things are bad. I'm saying this is the effect that they have on the mind. They stimulate the dopamine receptors. So it's not that the internet is addictive in its own right, right? It's that quick hit of dopamine you get to the pleasure centers of the brain that are addicting. So in a very real sense, this isn't your brain on drugs. Your brain is drugs, right? There's a mechanism in your brain. Your brain creates it's a chemical factory. The most powerful hallucinogen on the planet is synthesized in the pineal gland in your brain, right? DMT. So drug addicts will often talk about the high they experience before actually getting high, such as the car ride to get drugs from the dealer, right? Some have even said that the high on the way to picking up the drugs is just as good, if not better, than the actual drugs themselves. All right, it's this dopamine hit that you're getting. That's what's getting people high. That's why I believe drugs are called dope, is because it's related to the dopamine receptors. Dopamine is only meant to kickstart the party so that serotonin can take over for the longer haul. Serotonin is like, if dopamine is it's like the short term, it's like the appetizer, right? The main course is the serotonin, right? It's the difference of a good feeling in the short term versus a feeling great for a longer duration. Serotonin gets you over the long haul, whereas dopamine just gives you that quick little hit, right? If you get a message on your Twitter, or you get some update, some message on your phone, social media, you get ding, ding, ding. I feel that sometimes too. You get that ding, ding. Oh, I got a message. It's that little lift you feel, that's a little dopamine hit. So dopamine receptor burnout from overconsumption of drugs and electronic media is one of the leading causes of depression and anxiety today. Just being aware of that fact and letting the observer kind of watch that activity, right, can help you limit that, right, and to slow that down. Because once you burn out your dopamine receptors, you're in pretty bad shape. You're going to be chronically depressed and have all kinds of health issues, mental health issues especially. So this time in history will go down as the era of the addicts, because never before in human history have there been so many people suffering from addiction to drugs and electronic media, right? When people say, oh, this game is addictive, right? This show is addictive, this is addictive, that's addictive, internet's addictive, Twitter's addictive, I'm addicted to my phone's addictive, right? None of these things are really addictive. It's the dopamine hit you're getting naturally, right, in your brain. That's what you're addicted to. You're addicted to your own brain. Right? And most of this is coming from the fact that we were never taught how to regulate our own minds. Right? No one teaches this in school. No one teaches you how to regulate your own mind. No one talks about the watcher. No one talks about the observer. Right? Cultivating the observer in your mind. The observer is not the thinker, right? So forget about the opioid crisis and other prescription drugs, street drugs, social media, video games, and internet pornography. There's something else on top of all of that in Western society and really throughout the world now that is far more dangerous than all of these things. So forget all of those addictive things I'm talking about and how damaging they are. There's something else that future generations will look back on this time in history and wonder how the cause for such a widespread epidemic went on right under everyone's noses and why it took government so long to do something about. It's sugar. Nothing is more dangerous and damaging than sugar. Now, this is my own perspective as someone who has, there's alcoholism in my family, and myself, I've struggled with sugar addiction like crazy. And I understand now that chemically, if you look at sugar and if you look at alcohol on a chemical basis, they're only one molecule apart. They're very similar. Sugar and alcohol are very similar. And they're both very addictive, right? Why? Because sugar is the only addictive drug that is legal. It's socially acceptable, found in most prepackaged foods, and it's openly sold to children. Almost every holiday has its own type of candy associated with it, right? Nobody seems to take this one very seriously until they are suffering from the ravages of preventable diseases, of which there are many, right? Everyone knows that eating too much sugar is bad for you, but it's not taken very seriously because most people have no idea that sugar really is an addictive substance. It triggers the same dopamine hit just like any other drug, right? The only major difference between sugar and alcohol is alcohol crosses the blood-brain barrier, whereas sugar, it doesn't cross it, at least not in the same way. I mean, you've seen, maybe when you were a little kid, you had too much sugar and you feel hyped up and you're jumping around. It kind of, it doesn't really change your state of mind so much. You do feel hyped up, but it's not like you're intoxicated, where some people intoxicated can become a totally different person, right? But some people, many people, and this, I've experienced this myself, many people that are coming down from a sugar crash, for example, are totally different than when they're on their drug, when they're on sugar, right? So the impact of sugar as an addictive drug is responsible for more diseases than any single substance in food, right? There's some other substances in food that are dangerous, but sugar is probably the highest on the list. Now, sugar's gotten a free pass at this point because it doesn't immediately interfere with production in the workplace, nor does it cause fatal car accidents like alcohol, right? And that sort of thing. But the effects may be cumulative, whereas, with alcoholism, the effects are rather cumulative, but you're not going to see someone passed out on the street from eating too much sugar, right? But the effects of sugar are just as dangerous and costly to society, if not more, because they kind of happen in the background, right? They're not as, you don't see the effects right away, right? So it's kind of a silent killer in a way. So this may seem like a bold claim to some people who have never heard this idea that sugar is an addictive drug. By the way, this has been written about since at least the 1970s. There was a Harvard study in the 1960s that was also shown, they were showing that sugar was harmful, but they were actually paid something like $40,000. These scientists were paid by the big food industry to take that study and kind of fudge the numbers a little bit and kind of lie about it, right? So this has been known for a long time. The research on sugar has been established many decades ago. And meanwhile, the evidence on the dangers of sugar continue to mount. There's all of these studies. I mean, it's not a surprise anymore, or shouldn't be. It's the reason why serving sizes have increased for sugary drinks and foods over the years, right? When I was a kid, I think a large was like maybe a 20-ounce soda, right? At McDonald's would be like a large. And now, I mean, I haven't been in a McDonald's forever, but now I've seen large sodas that are like 64 ounces or something, or these big, like 128 ounce convenience store jugs of soda, right? It's because the addict requires more and more of a drug over time in order to maintain that chemical dependence, right? And sugar isn't everything. I mean, I try to buy tomato soup and there's just gobs of sugar in it. You know, I try to buy anything. And the food manufacturers are saying that they can't sell a lot of their foods without adding sugar because people just don't like the taste, right? So this addiction is very powerful. Here's a quote by the Nobel Prize-winning physiology researcher and scientist, Dr. Otto H. Warburg. He says, this is about sugar. Cancer, above all other diseases, has countless secondary causes. Okay, but now he's going to talk about the primary cause. But even for cancer, there was only one prime cause, summarized in a few words. This is what he won the Nobel Prize for. The prime cause of cancer is the replacement of the respiration of oxygen in normal body cells by a fermentation of sugar. This was known in 1931, right? By the 1950s and 60s, it was becoming clear that something was causing a spike in illnesses, such as heart disease and diabetes. Processed foods with substances such as processed salt, sugar, and partially hydrogenated oils are among the greatest contributors to some of these metabolic syndrome diseases. Voices of reason were quickly drowned out by those who stand to make the most profit from these processed foods, like the famous study from Harvard that was just in the past few years uncovered to be a total fraud. Sugar is literally killing people with kindness. Future generations will look back on this time as the single biggest preventable drug and health epidemic in history. Now, for the good news, we all possess the single most powerful and complex piece of equipment in the known universe when it comes to making our lives better. It's our minds. Small adjustments over time can accumulate great gains. So remember, you want to cultivate the watcher, cultivate the observer. And like I said, if you have a Japanese garden and if you can get the tour from a knowledgeable person to explain that the garden is there to open up all of your senses, and there's a conceal and reveal dynamic happening in the garden. And there are these stone monuments, these Zen Buddhist candle boxes, and there's the 9 levels of awareness, the 5 senses plus 4 levels of awareness on top of that. There's all of this amazing spiritual, enlightening, whatever you want to call it. There's all of this wonderful, there are these tools that are there to help you bring up the quality of your awareness. And it can be found in a Japanese garden. And chances are, if you live in a fairly populated area, there's a Japanese garden near you, right? So the forces of misinformation and attentive misdirection are very powerful. They want to pull your attention. Something to know about YouTube, right, is that it really is an attention aggregator. It's an attention engine. It's all about getting your attention, right? I realize my delivery on my videos isn't the same as a lot of bigger YouTubers that have they have a very polished presentation, but they also do all of the little things to get your attention. It's almost like if you can get attention, get the most attention at whatever cost, it's worth it, right? Obviously, that's not how this channel works. That's not how I approach life. But you see what I mean, right? This attentive misdirection is very powerful. If I can get your attention, right? If I can get your attention, I can somehow extract value out of that. I can somehow convert that into dollars. Maybe I monetize my channel, or maybe, that kind of thing. You look at the advertisements associated with what I'm trying to do something to get your attention, right? And by the way, I don't have any intention to monetize my channel because it just doesn't make any sense. I hope in the future that you guys will support me voluntarily, maybe on like a Patreon or something like that. But I have no plans to put ads on my channel. So, mastery of your own mind is the key to navigating your way through the noise and finding your own bliss in life, accessing your inner resources, right? We all have certain inner resources available to us that we can rely on, right? We all have the observer within us. We all have the watcher. Sometimes we just need to wake the watcher up. The watcher is sometimes asleep, right? Now, mastery of your own mind doesn't mean you're doing it perfectly, right? It merely means you realize that you should honor your divine essence or your God essence within yourself by creating a sense of bliss within yourself, right? That's what you want, right? That's certainly what I want. So in my own experience, I have been able to improve my life dramatically by improving the quality of my attention, right? Not by focusing on things even more and chopping them apart with the intellect, but instead improving the quality of the observer. Just letting the observer observe, right? And having some discernment when it comes to what I choose to take into my mind. That's primary. And after you practice that for a while, you'll invariably start to make better choices about what you take in to your body, right? So this one practice has helped me improve my inner being to the point where every aspect of my life has changed for the better. Obviously, this is a work in progress, like all of us. Like there isn't anything to do perfectly. You will never do it perfectly. So don't punish yourself. Don't use your intellect. Don't turn your intellect in on itself, right? Don't turn your own intellect against you. That's another point of the quality of attention, is that if you're analyzing everything to death, and you eventually will turn your own intellect upon yourself, well, then the quality of your attention is suffering, right? And you want the observer to take over. You want the observer just to observe without labeling everything, without chopping everything into bits, right? Now, one thing I should remind you of, just because something works for me, it doesn't mean it's going to work for you. This is one of the biggest traps that I used to fall into myself all the time. I often see this happening in the areas of spiritual growth, self-help, and relationship advice. We should not take what I have to say as true. Okay? You should, however, investigate what I have said for yourself. You owe yourself that much. And find what works for you. Right? Maybe something that has helped me will help you, but maybe it won't. I like to think that it will help at least one other person. It'll help someone else, but I cannot say that for certain. Okay? And while universal truths certainly exist, how they are understood and implemented depend on the person, depend on your life experience, depend on your worldview. Okay? Okay, this is the end of part 16, and next week I will be back for part 17. Thank you.